The morning sun painted the glass towers of Lagos in hues of gold and amber as Richard Adewale stepped out of his limousine, dressed not in his usual tailored suit, but in tattered clothes that smelled faintly of dust and time. To the world, he was one of Africa's youngest billionaires, a man whose name graced magazine covers, whose innovations in renewable energy had powered entire villages, and whose smile had launched 1,000 rumors. But today, no one would recognize him. He had made a decision, one that would shake the very foundation of his empire. For months, Richard had grown uneasy. His company, Adewale Industries, had expanded faster than he ever imagined, but with that growth came whispers. Employees stealing funds, managers exploiting workers, executives showing cruelty to the poor who came seeking jobs. Richard had always believed in kindness and fairness, but lately he feared his vision was being corrupted by greed. So he chose to see the truth with his own eyes. Disguised as a homeless man named Tund, Richard approached his own headquarters, a glittering skyscraper that seemed to touch the clouds. The guards at the gate sneered when they saw him. "Hey, old man, what do you want here?" one barked, stepping forward. I'm looking for work," Richard replied softly, lowering his eyes. "Anything at all. I can sweep floors, clean windows." The guard laughed harshly. "Do you look like someone who belongs here? Get out before I call the police." The word stung, but Richard only nodded and walked away. Yet, instead of leaving, he circled the side entrance, where a young janitor was mopping the corridor. She was slender, her uniform faded, but her eyes shone with warmth. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked when she saw him shivering. He hesitated. "Just hungry, haven't eaten since yesterday." Without a word, she reached into her lunch bag and handed him half of her food, a simple portion of rice and beans. "Here, I don't have much, but it's enough for two if we share." Richard watched her silently, moved by her quiet compassion. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Amara," she said with a small smile. "I started working here 2 weeks ago. The pay isn't much, but I'm grateful. My little brother is sick, and every naira counts." That moment carved itself into Richard's heart. Here was someone struggling, yet kind, while those with power mocked and pushed others down. Over the next few days, he roamed the building in his disguise. He watched how some employees ridiculed cleaners, how managers ignored workers' pleas, how arrogance filled the halls where ambition once thrived. But he also saw people like Amara, humble souls who worked tirelessly without recognition. One evening, Richard overheard 2 executives, the very men he had trusted most, arguing in his private office. "If the boss doesn't return soon, we'll move the funds to the offshore account," one whispered sharply. "He won't even notice. That fool's too busy playing philanthropist." Richard's heart froze. So it was true. His empire had been rotting from the inside, and he had been too blind to see it. He left the building that night with his mind ablaze. He had seen greed, cruelty, and betrayal, but also loyalty and light in the unlikeliest places. It was time to reveal the truth. The next morning, a black convoy of luxury cars pulled up outside the headquarters. Cameras flashed, and whispers rippled through the staff. From one of the vehicles stepped Richard Adewale, immaculate in a navy suit, his face unreadable. The guards at the gate went pale. One of them stammered, "Yes, sir, we didn't know." "I know," Richard said coldly. "I saw everything." He strode past him into the main lobby, where every employee had gathered in confusion. Then his eyes found Amara, standing quietly at the back, still in her janitor uniform. Their gazes met, and she froze. "You," Richard said, his voice softer now, "showed kindness when others showed contempt." Gasps filled the air as murmurs spread through the crowd. The executives tried to smile, sweating nervously, but Richard turned to them next. "As for those who betrayed my trust," he said, his tone now sharp as steel, "your greed ends today." Security stepped forward at his signal, escorting the corrupt men away. The entire building fell silent, the echo of justice lingering in the marble hall. Then Richard turned once more to Amara. "From this day forward, you are no longer a janitor," he said. "You will lead the new division for employee welfare, to ensure that no one here is treated as you were." Tears welled in her eyes. "Sir, I don't know what to say. Just promise me one thing, Richard replied gently. Never lose the kindness that made you stand out when no one was watching. And as applause filled the air, Richard looked out through the glass walls of his empire. He realized something profound, that true wealth wasn't measured in money or power, but in humanity. Yet even as peace seemed to return, Richard had no idea that this was only the beginning, because deep within the company, another secret was brewing, one that would test his faith in ways he could never imagine. That night, the city of Lagos glimmered beneath a velvet sky, and Richard stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the wind whispering against his thoughts. The stars seemed distant, almost unreachable, much like the peace he had once felt when he first built his company from nothing. He poured himself a glass of water, his reflection in the window, revealing a man who had gained the world, yet nearly lost his soul. His phone buzzed softly on the marble counter. A message flashed on the screen. "We need to talk. It's urgent." The sender's name made his brow furrow. Michael Adebayo, his chief financial officer, the one person he hadn't confronted yet. Richard hesitated. Michael had been with him from the start, a loyal friend, or so he thought. Something in that message felt heavy, secretive. He typed back, "Come to my office tomorrow morning. We'll talk then." The next morning, the entire company seemed to breathe differently. News of Richard's test had spread like wildfire, how the billionaire disguised himself as a poor man, how he'd caught corruption festering at the heart of his empire. Some employees walked with their heads down, others whispered nervously, and a few looked at Amara with newfound respect. Amara herself was still overwhelmed. She'd never expected her small act of kindness to change her life overnight. The new office Richard had given her was modest but bright, filled with papers and plans to improve working conditions for every employee. Yet, deep down, she felt uneasy. She had noticed things, strange looks from certain people, quiet conversations that stopped when she entered the room. It was as if someone didn't want her there. When she brought it up to Richard, he smiled faintly. People feared change, Amara, especially those who had benefited from injustice. Give it time. They'll adjust. But Amara wasn't convinced. She had grown up on the streets. She knew when eyes were watching her not with suspicion, but with threat. Meanwhile, in a darkened office on the top floor, Michael Adebayo sat with two men, both senior executives who had narrowly escaped Richard's wrath. Papers were spread across the desk, numbers and signatures scribbled in haste. "You said he doesn't know about this account?" one asked nervously. Michael's lips tightened. "Not yet, but if he keeps digging, he will. And when he does, all of us go down. We've hidden too much money to cover it up now. So what do we do?" Michael looked toward the city skyline, his face hardening. "We make sure he doesn't find out, whatever it takes." Later that day, Richard met Michael in his office. The air was thick with silence. "Michael," Richard began calmly, "I trusted you. You were like a brother to me." Michael forced a smile. "And I still am, Richard. Always. I heard about what happened yesterday. Bold move, but you've caused fear among the staff. Investors are calling nonstop. Fear is good when it comes from truth," Richard replied evenly. "We needed a reset." Michael leaned forward slightly. "Just don't push too far. Some people won't take kindly to being exposed. You're powerful, but even power attracts enemies." Richard studied him quietly. There was something off in Michael's eyes, a flicker of calculation behind the concern. "I'll take my chances," he said finally. "If we stand for justice, then let them come." When Michael left, Richard turned toward a file cabinet where he had stored documents from the investigation he'd begun secretly after his disguise experiment. But when he opened it, his heart stopped. Several key folders were gone. He called his assistant immediately. "Did anyone enter my office this morning?" "No, sir," she replied. "Only Mr. Michael. He said you were expecting him." Richard closed his eyes. Michael. He knew then that something deeper was unfolding, something far beyond greed. That night, as rain lashed against the windows, Amara was working late, organizing files in her new department. She heard footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate. When she turned, a tall man in a dark coat stood near the doorway, his face shadowed. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. The man didn't answer. He stepped closer, sliding an envelope onto her desk. "For you. Read it, but not here." Before she could respond, he was gone. Her heart pounded as she opened the envelope in the restroom a few minutes later. Inside was a USB drive and a single note that read, "If you value your life don't trust Michael Adebayo." Amara's hands trembled. Who had sent this? And what was on the drive? She tucked it into her pocket and left the building quietly. The next morning, she went straight to Richard's office. He looked exhausted, dark circles beneath his eyes. But when he saw her face, his expression sharpened. "Amara? What's wrong?" She placed a USB on his desk. "Someone gave me this last night. They said it's about Michael." Richard frowned, plugged it into his laptop, and opened the only file it contained, a series of scanned documents, bank statements, and voice recordings. He pressed play. A voice, Michael's, spoke coldly through the speakers. "Once the money's in Zurich, we'll trigger the board vote. Richard won't even see it coming. By the time he realizes, the company will be under our control." Richard's breath caught. He scrolled to the statements. Millions siphoned through shell companies, false signatures, forged authorizations. His name was on them all. "Dear God," he whispered. Amara looked horrified. "He's setting you up." Richard slammed his fist on the desk. "Not just me. The entire company. Everything I built." He stood abruptly. "I need to confront him now." But Amara grabbed his arm. "Wait. If he knows you found out, he could destroy everything. You have to be careful." He paused, her words sinking in. She was right. Michael was dangerous now. Desperate men always were. "Then we do this smart," Richard said finally. "We'll gather proof quietly. And when the time comes, we'll make sure the truth destroys him, not us." For the next several days, they worked in secret. Amara pretended to go about her duties while discreetly recording conversations. Richard met with a trusted journalist under the guise of charity meeting, feeding her fragments of the truth. Every night, they compared notes, piecing together the puzzle of betrayal. But Michael was watching too. He noticed the whispers, the sudden caution in Richard's behavior. One evening, he met with his associates again. "He knows," Michael said flatly. "I can see it in his eyes." "So what's the plan?" Michael's gaze darkened. "We make the first move. If he exposes us, we lose everything. But if he disappears, the company stays in our hands." The room fell silent. One of the men shifted uneasily. "You're not serious." "I'm very serious," Michael interrupted coldly. "Accidents happen all the time." The next day, as Richard drove toward the foundation office for a charity event, he noticed a black SUV following him. At first, he ignored it, thinking it was coincidence. But when he turned down a side street and the SUV followed, his pulse quickened. He pressed hard on the accelerator, weaving through traffic, the city flashing past in streaks of color and rain. Then suddenly, bang! His rear-view mirror shattered. A bullet hole glinted in the glass. Panic surged through him. He swerved, tires screeching, his heart hammering like a drum. At that same moment, Amara, sitting in her small office, received a call from an unknown number. "Miss Amara," a deep voice said urgently, "if you care about Richard Adewale, get to Victoria Bridge now. He's in danger." Her breath caught. She dropped the phone and ran out into the street, rain soaking her clothes. She didn't think, didn't hesitate, only ran. Somewhere ahead, amid the storm and the flashing city lights, the billionaire who had once pretended to be poor was now fighting for his life. And the truth they were uncovering was about to explode in a way that would change everything they thought they knew. Rain pounded against the cracked asphalt as Richard's car skidded near the edge of Victoria Bridge. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as another bullet tore through the windshield. The world blurred, headlights, raindrops, and fear merging into chaos. He slammed the brakes, the car spinning out of control until it stopped inches from the barrier overlooking the churning waters below. The SUV screeched to a halt behind him. Doors swung open and 3 men stepped out, faces masked, guns glinting beneath the stormlight. Richard ducked, breathing hard. He had nothing, no weapon, no protection, just the will to survive. One of the men shouted over the rain, "End it quickly!" No witnesses. But before they could move closer, another vehicle's headlights blazed through the storm, a taxi speeding toward them. It halted abruptly, and Amara leapt out, clutching an iron rod she grabbed from the cab's trunk. Her eyes were wild, terrified but determined. "Richard!" she screamed. He turned in disbelief. "Amara, no! Get back!" She ignored him and swung the rod at the nearest attacker, striking his arm. The man grunted in pain, dropping his weapon. Another aimed at her, but Richard charged forward, tackling him into the mud. The gun slid across the pavement. Thunder cracked above as the third man raised his pistol, pointing it at Richard's chest. Amara's eyes widened. Without thinking, she threw herself between them. The gun went off. The sound shattered the night. Richard froze as Amara collapsed into his arms, blood staining her shirt. He caught her trembling hand, voice breaking. "No, no, no. Stay with me. Amara, please." She tried to smile, her lips trembling. "I told you, I wouldn't let anything happen to you." Before the gunman could fire again, police sirens wailed in the distance. The attackers panicked, scrambling into the SUV and speeding away into the night. Richard pressed his hand over Amara's wound, tears mixing with the rain. "Hold on," he whispered, lifting her into his arms and running toward the approaching flashing lights. "You're not leaving me now." Hours later, in the cold glow of the hospital corridor, Richard sat outside the emergency room, his clothes soaked in blood and rain. The doctors moved frantically inside. Each second stretched like eternity. His mind raced. The betrayal, the lies, the near death, it all spiraled into a storm inside him. When the surgeon finally stepped out, Richard stood instantly. "Is she?" "She's alive," the doctor said gently. "The bullet missed her heart by less than an inch. She's very strong. She'll recover." Richard's knees gave out, relief washing over him. "Thank God!" He walked into the ward hours later, where Amara lay pale but breathing steadily. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of his footsteps. "You look terrible," she whispered weakly. He laughed softly, sitting beside her. "Says the woman who took a bullet for me." "I couldn't let them hurt you," she said faintly. "You still have a company to save and a country that looks up to you." He took her hand. "None of it means anything without people like you. Amara, you reminded me what it means to be human." But even as they shared that fragile moment of peace, Richard knew it wasn't over. Michael was still out there, powerful, ruthless, and now desperate. 3 days later, Richard stood in the boardroom of Adewale Industries, facing the most critical meeting of his life. The board members sat in tense silence as Michael entered confidently, his usual charm in place. "Richard," he said smoothly, "you caused quite the storm. The media's everywhere. The investors are nervous. You've made a spectacle of yourself." Richard's expression was calm, almost too calm. "Funny, that's what you said the day you started stealing from me." Michael's eyes narrowed. "Be careful with your accusations." "Oh, I'm far beyond accusations," Richard replied. He pressed a button on the projector remote. The screen behind him flickered to life, displaying bank records, voice clips, and video footage. Gasps echoed around the room. Michael's face drained of color. "Where did you get this?" "Let's just say," Richard said coldly, "the people you underestimated are the ones who brought it to me." As the audio played Michael's voice confessing to plot, the board members exchanged shocked glances. One of them whispered, "My God, Michael, is this true?" Michael stammered, "This is a setup." Richard stepped closer, his voice low but deadly. "You tried to kill me. You nearly killed Amara. You stole from the very people who helped us build this empire. And for what? More money? More power?" Michael's composure broke. He lunged forward, grabbing Richard by the collar, but security burst through the doors, restraining him instantly. "Take him away," Richard ordered. As Michael was dragged out, he shouted hoarsely, "You think you won, Richard? You're no saint. You built your empire on ambition. Same as me." Richard didn't reply. He simply turned away, letting Michael's words dissolve into the empty air. When the door finally closed, silence filled the room. Then one of the board members stood and said quietly, "You've shown us who you really are, Mr. Adewale, not just a businessman, but a leader with integrity." Richard nodded humbly. "Let this be a reminder to all of us. Success means nothing if we lose our soul trying to keep it." In the following weeks, everything changed. Michael's arrest made global headlines. Investors who had once doubted Richard now called him the billionaire with a conscience. But Richard cared little for fame. He poured his energy into rebuilding the company, not as an empire of wealth, but as a family built on respect, fairness, and compassion. Amara, once a janitor, now sat beside him as head of the new humanitarian foundation bearing her name, the Amara Trust, dedicated to providing education and health care to underprivileged workers across Africa. Her story inspired millions. During a press event 6 months later, journalists gathered in front of the Grand Glass Tower, where Richard and Amara stood side by side. Cameras flashed as Richard took the microphone. "6 months ago," he began, his voice steady but emotional, "I disguised myself as a poor man to test the hearts of those I worked with. I thought I was testing others, but in truth, life was testing me. I learned that real strength doesn't come from power or riches, but from the courage to stay kind in a world that often rewards cruelty." He turned toward Amara. "And I met someone who reminded me of that, a woman whose kindness changed not just my life, but the soul of this company." Applause filled the courtyard as Amara stepped forward. She spoke softly but with conviction. "We all wear masks in life, some of wealth, some of struggle. But underneath, we are the same. If you ever have the chance to help someone who is less than you, do it. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness can rewrite destiny." The crowd erupted in cheers. The cameras captured the moment, the billionaire and the janitor who had changed each other's worlds. As the day ended, Richard found himself once again on the balcony of his penthouse, watching the sunset paint Legos in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Amara joined him, leaning on the railing beside him. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. He nodded. "It always was. I just forgot to look." They stood in silence for a moment, the city alive beneath them. "Do you ever think," Amara asked softly, "what would have happened if you never disguised yourself that day?" Richard smiled faintly. "Then I'd still be rich, but I'd never been truly wealthy." The wind carried her laughter into the evening, soft and free. And somewhere in that golden horizon, the story of a man who once tested his employees by pretending to be poor, only to discover the priceless value of kindness, loyalty, and truth, became more than just a lesson. It became a legacy. A few weeks later, a letter arrived at Richard's office with no return address. Inside was a single note written in rough handwriting. "You expose corruption in your company. Now look beyond it. The world outside needs you more than ever." Richard folded the note thoughtfully. He didn't know who sent it, but somehow he felt it was a sign that his journey wasn't ending here. He walked to the window, gazing out at the bustling streets below, a spark of determination lighting in his eyes. Because though his test had ended, a new mission had just begun, one to bring justice, hope, and compassion far beyond the walls of Adewale Industries. And as the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the sky in fire and gold, Richard knew that the man who once pretended to be poor had finally become something far greater than a billionaire. He had become humanity's richest man in heart.